Hey, real quick, before you jump into the video you're about to see, if you like this video and you want more premium content like this, go check us out on thelandinthebible.com and subscribe for premium content. Welcome to this episode of the Land in the Bible podcast. Today we are talking about, well, we're talking about a lot of stuff, but we're in the second part of our Bethlehem Stories series. Is it a series or is it a mini series?
Well, our previous series were 6 episodes, if I remember correctly. 8? Even more. 6 or 8 is it kind of like a full series.
So
this is 3.
This is 3.
It's still a series, like a trilogy maybe. It's like the Lord of the Rings or something like that.
I like it. This is where you kind of get into the whole thing is like, well, and we know what a couple is. Well, what's a few and what's several?
That's hard.
What's a few?
I know somebody got fired for that because
Really?
they said that something was that few something happened, and their boss said that it wasn't enough to qualify as a few, and they fired them for being deceptive. So
I feel like a few is like 3 to 5 and several is like 5 to 7. So there's some overlap. Like 7 or more is like several.
And at some point it becomes. At some point, is it a lot?
Don't you feel like you're like, no, there were several times. Like
several.
What does that sound
that's
like?
That's like I'd say 5 to 7 or more, or even more than that.
Well, just a few. Well, you know, it's
just
more
a
than
few.
2.
Oof.
3 to 5.
Yeah.
See, doesn't that feel right? I don't know. So we're gonna do a series as a few episodes.
Few episodes on things that happened in Bethlehem.
Exactly. So Bethlehem Stories. So as we talked about last time, this is kind of,
you know, when I was a kid. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
It's fine.
You're trying to pivot to serious. When I was a young lad, a TV. Like a season was like 20 something episodes.
Oh yeah.
Then they went down to like 13, and now if you're watching like BBC, it can be 3 or 4. Yeah, that's a season.
6 or 7 on HBO Max or Netflix. These like premium.
And 8's like a lot.
I think they realized this is too expensive.
Maybe so.
And they're like, how can we produce something more awesome but less of it? Yeah, it's cool though. They know we want long form content.
So if TV shows can do it with big budgets, why can't we reduce a series from?
I think we can.
From 8 to 3. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is on BBC is like 3.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a great. I think that sets us up well for where we're going today.
I think we're gonna find niche.
So today we're in the second part, and we are talking about David. And so there's always so much content to work with David, but specifically we're talking about the Bethlehem connection.
Yeah, and again, our theme for this series is God using unlikely people. So in the first episode we talked about Ruth and how she was from a nation that was hated, huge racial animosity, between Israel and Moab. And, Moabites reviewed as disgusting and gross and sinful and awful, and how God redeemed, Lot's horrific act in that cave with his daughters and brought a Moabitess into the line of David and later Jesus. So that was our first unlikely person that God used, was this girl, this widow girl from Moab, and that's super unlikely. And then as you roll the pages of history forward, about 3 generations, then we're gonna land with David. And we're going to see why he's also unlikely. And what I want to do with David to really paint why he is an unlikely character is to do a little bit of compare and contrast between David and the previous king of Israel, Saul. And just look at, why are these two men so different? What did God like about David? Why even though he was, what made him unlikely, but then also what made God said, yeah, but I approve, because because to sort of give away the end from the beginning, there were a lot of things about Saul that people approved of. They're like, yeah, he's great, he's good. But God looked at it and said, no, I don't like that. Whereas David, the Bible says a man after God's own heart. Like David, doesn't mean David was perfect. He was horrifically flawed. We all know of his sin stuff with Bathsheba and, violent man. He's plenty of problems. David had plenty of problems. But what you see with David throughout his life, for instance, when he sins, is that he knows he cares more about what God thinks than what people think. And I think that's clear throughout his life. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's kind of what we're going to kind of talk about with him, is why he's unlikely, but then why God said, yeah, but I like that guy. So that's maybe something for us to emulate in our lives. Maybe.
Got it.
So let's start with, again, sort of like a compare and contrast. And let's talk about the previous king. So, if we're doing the history, we talked in our last episode about, Israel leaving Egypt, wandering around, encountering, Moabites and Ammonites and Edomites and all these people eventually coming into the land and settling. So now at this point in history where we get around to Saul and David and those guys, they've been in the land for quite some time. But for the first bit of their time there, they had judges as leaders. Okay. God did not want them to have a monarch. He wanted it to be something of a theocracy with, sort of like prophets and judges sort of leading from time to time, basically a tribal system, really. Uh-huh. And they set up a bit of a capital, if you would, at a place called, in English we would probably say Shiloh. In Hebrew it's more like Shiloh. You have to do this like, kind of weird H at the end. But the tabernacle, which was sort of like the pre-temple, sort of the the portable one, is set up there. It sits there for 369 years. And you have these judges running around sort of being in charge. And so the religion centers on Shiloh, because Jerusalem is not the capital yet, obviously. And life kind of rocks on for, almost 400 years, basically, from the time they get there until sort of where we are. There's, patterns have sort of been established. Again, it is tribal. They have intertribal warfare sometimes. The book of Judges at the very end records a horrific war where basically all the other tribes gang up on and almost completely annihilate the tribe of Benjamin. So we kind of see that that's going on. We see that their neighbors sort of pick on them. You have the Philistines, who are sort of, we think maybe they're like Mycenaean or sort of from Crete. So there's some sort of sea people, sort of Greek-ish, that landed on the coast of Israel, and then settled the coastal plain. And they would, in the biblical Hebrew Jews, if you look at their centers of population, places like Bethlehem and Hebron and later Jerusalem, Gibeon, Shiloh, those are all mountain places. So the Hebrews are sort of mountain people. They're good at sort of guerrilla warfare. They like to hide in the bushes and the caves. And the Philistines are more Greek style. They like to have chariots and fight in formations and line up on plains. And so you have this sort of all that's going on. And there's all this fighting, and the occasional judge will rally all the tribes together, and they'll go beat somebody and win their freedom for a while. Then they'll kind of, and this whole push and ebb and flow is going on. But eventually, the people of Israel are like, we want a king. We want to be like the surrounding nations. We want a king and be united. And God didn't like that, but they insisted. And so God tells Samuel, appoint a king. And Samuel then appoints Saul. Okay. And if you read about Saul, this is in 1 Samuel 9, these are his qualifications. It says there was a prominent man of Benjamin named Kish, son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bokorath, son of Aphiah, son of a Benjaminite. He had a son named Saul, an impressive young man. So Saul's impressive. There was no one more impressive among the Israelites than he. He stood a head taller than anyone else. So Saul's qualifications for kingness are that he's tall and good looking. He looks like a king. You know, they're looking around the country and they're like, oh, look at that guy.
Yeah.
That's a good looking man right there. You know, tall, strong, broad shoulder. He's got a Captain America thing, or Captain Israel, I guess.
I was thinking Gaston from Beauty and the Beast.
Okay. And that's actually
There's
not
no one in town half as manly.
That's, and in a way, that's not a bad, that's actually not a bad parallel.
Okay.
So that's who Saul is. He's good looking. He's tall. Now, early on, he still has some level of humility. Like he kind of hides and doesn't like, I don't want to be king. You know, but he takes it. And yeah, and he is the image guy. He's the tall, good looking, manly man. You know, he's a successful warrior. So yeah, he, you know, Gaston's actually not a, that's a pretty good, it's a pretty good parallel. And, Saul has a problem. Now, well, first off, let's talk about what was good. By any human estimation, I think you have to say Saul's a really good king. I mean, I think you have to say that. Saul takes 12 disparate, don't like each other very much tribes and melds them into a country. That's not a small feat. Saul is able to beat back his enemies and, you know, wins enough military victories that Israel asserts itself and, you know, is not at least subservient to, you know, the Philistines and the Moabites and all those sort of surrounding nations that have been picking on them. So has some level of military success. He also just king for a long time. You know, he was able to establish, I mean, you probably wouldn't have bet on him lasting very long when he first became king, but he does. He reigns for a long time. And so there's a lot of things about him that you're like, well, hey, good job. You know, you're doing really well. But he consistently has a problem, which is, I want to say that he is the ultimate image manager. You know, and I look at our modern world and gosh, I see people that, you know, the whole social media thing.
Right.
It's just, there's so many people that care. And it's not that you shouldn't care. I mean, obviously you don't want to show, like I shouldn't show up today for, you know, filming a podcast in like the nastiest clothes I've got with my hair, you know, like you should have a certain, you know, pride in your appearance. And if you're a boss or a director of something, you know, you probably shouldn't show up at your corporate office in, you know, running shorts and flip flops or something. You know, I'm not arguing that image doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But at the point when image is all that matters and you elevate it above reality, then I think you have a problem. So, I guess it's been about just before COVID, you know, whatever, in, you know, BC, you know, about 1 year BC before COVID. I took a group of students, they were Arab Palestinian kids, and we went on a trip to Central Europe. And we were in Prague and then later in Salzburg, I think, if I remember correctly. And when we were in Prague the first day, so I'm a history teacher at heart, you know, that's why I like doing these things, right? And so I was pumped, you know, I was like, yeah, we're going to see castles and cathedrals and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to get to sort of like lecture some of those things on site and explain why they're cool. And so I was really excited for that. And so we took a train from central Prague up to the top of the castle above the city. And we got out and I gathered all the students up and I talked for about 10 minutes and I was like, okay, let's go in. There's like a bridge that you cross and, you know, it's medieval. It's really beautiful there. And in the cathedral sort of over the wall, it's just a really pretty spot. Talked about it for a minute. Let's go. And I turned and I walked probably about 50 yards or so with my wife. And at some point she said, nobody's following us. And I turned around and all these high school kids that had with me on this trip are all, I don't know how to describe it. They're all in the throes of trying to take about 45 pictures for their Instagram accounts each. So they're posing, they're doing the over the shoulder look, and they're doing the like whatever, and they're doing this group and that group and whatever, and they wanted to take pictures for like half an hour. And, you know, so I let it go for about 5 minutes. I was like, guys, we got to move. They're like, but we don't have stuff like this at home. We want to get pictures in front of it for our Instagram accounts. And I was like, okay, but there's lots of pretty here, so it'll be fine. And so I sort of drug them into the castle in front of the big church there. And I got talked about that for about 10 minutes. Like, okay. And we go to move, and it's the same thing again. And they're taking all these pictures, and you know, again, the girls are doing about 25 poses each, and various angles of displaying themselves and all this kind of stuff. And I spent the whole day having to like try to do my academic thing, and then drag them to the next site, because every single place they wanted to stop and do like a photo shoot. I asked one of the girls just before lunch, I says, how many pictures have you taken of yourself today? And she scrolls through her phone, and she says about 250. She had taken 250 pictures of herself before lunch. It was unbelievable. And I said to them at one point, I said, you know, guys, I think you care more. It's more important to you that people back home think you're having a good time than it is that you're actually having a good time. And they all laughed and said, oh yeah, it's kind of true. We really, and it's this weird obsession with like image and appearance. They couldn't be in the moment. They couldn't just enjoy the place. They couldn't sit there and look at it with their own eyeballs. They had to think about like getting pictures of me in front of it in 15 different poses and deciding which one looks better, so that I can weed through all those tonight and put up, you know, posts of myself. And we have become, I think, like a nation with an image obsession. I don't think there's I don't think there's any way to disagree with that. I mean, I don't know. You're sort of in that industry. I mean, is that accurate, not accurate?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think there's definitely research on the way that our brains interact with that feedback, right? So the endorphins you get from people interacting with your content.
Click, 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 like.
Yeah, and you post something and you get immediate feedback. And it's a unique thing, and it is like an endorphin response, and it becomes like, I'm checking my phone. I don't even know why I'm checking my phone. I'm just doing it.
Yeah, and one of those girls, a few weeks later, I bumped into her in town, and I was like, how you doing, you know? And she said, what she wanted to tell me was, my picture on the bridge, that's the most likes I ever got. Like, you know, so she spent like a week, 10 days in, I think, one of the most beautiful places on earth. And her big takeaway was, I got the most likes ever from a picture there. So yeah, that was so worth it. It's like, I usually like weep for the whatever, but human nature doesn't change, right? So we have new tools now, you know, that we can all sort of indulge in this, you know, like image fluffing up or whatever, you know, and it's so fake, you know, because the picture you put on Instagram is not, you know, when you were angry and fighting with somebody, you know, like, I mean, you know, we do it. I just got back from a big trip out west with my family, just speaking engagements, and, you know, we would stop at, you know, beautiful places, you know, Zion National Park. We stopped there or whatever, and you get all these family pictures. You know, you don't take the picture when you're in the car and you're like, just be quiet, you know, like you don't take those pictures and post them. It's all fake.
Yeah,
and I think that's to the point. Saul was obsessed with image and became fake. So let's look at some back to the biblical text. Let's look at some examples of that. So in 1 Samuel 15, when Saul loses his anointing, when God takes the kingdom from him, basically he was told to go to wage war against the Amalekites and to destroy everything. And he didn't destroy everything. He took the stuff he wanted and destroyed some stuff. And so he disobeyed, and God sends Samuel to find him. God's like, go find Samuel, go find Saul and tell him I've taken my blessing away from him. And so first thing that happens is if you look in Samuel 15:12, it says, early in the morning, Samuel got up to confront Saul. But it was reported to Samuel, Saul went to Carmel, where he set up a monument for himself. So he, like, Saul's not with his army. You know, he's gone off to, you know, a statue of himself that he was having done, you know. So you see there, you know, he's not building an altar to God. He's not whatever. He's building a monument of me, you know. So you sort of see that, okay, Saul, we see what you're about. And then later, if you kind of scroll down the text to verse 24, and Samuel finally catches up with him, and he confronts him. And first he's like, you sinned. And he's like, no, I didn't. I destroyed everything. Well, except for the stuff that we didn't destroy because, like, the men wanted it and it was cool, right? But I mostly obeyed. And mostly obeying is obeying, isn't it? Which, of course, it's not. You know, like if your kids mostly obey you, they didn't obey you. So there's this confrontation. And finally, in verse 24, Saul says this. He says, I have sinned. I have transgressed the Lord's command in your words because I was afraid of the people. I obeyed them. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin and return with me so I can worship the Lord. Okay, so what you see in his statement is, I know what God said, but I also know what the people wanted. And they wanted to take spoils, not to kill all the cattle and the whatever, to kill everything. So I was more afraid of them than God. So you see that statement there where you kind of get a feeling for like, okay, we're a little out of whack here. But then then you also see that he just doesn't think it's a big deal, because he immediately says, therefore, please forgive me. So it's okay. So I did that, but like, come on, can we just move on? He says, please forgive me and return with me so I can worship the Lord. So what he's more concerned with is that Samuel will go out with him in front of the people and the soldiers and, you know, pray with him, worship with him. So he cares about the appearance more than what happened. Okay? And Samuel is appalled. So Samuel says, I will not return with you because you rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. And when Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed the corner of his robe and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingship of Israel away from you today and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you. Furthermore, the Eternal One of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a man who changes his mind. So the prophet of Israel, Samuel, says, God's taking the kingdom, he's giving it to somebody else, and he's not going to change his mind. And this is over, like he pronounces this sort of curse on Saul, and Saul's response is unbelievable. Saul says, I have sinned. Please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so I can bow in worship to the Lord your God. So he cared more about the appearance. He doesn't say, please, 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 I'm sorry, I repent.
Yeah.
He says, okay, fine, but would you go out there with me though, really? Because, you know, it'll look better. So he has become completely image obsessed. It's all he cares about. I won't read it all, but this crazy thing happens. So Samuel goes out there with him. He brings the king of Amalek out, and it says in verse 33, it says, then he hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. So Samuel was obviously very upset. So he takes the king of Amalek and chops him into bits in front of the people, probably to communicate that God's a little angry. So that all goes down. And so God has rejected Saul because he's disobedient. And in Saul's mind, again, he cares more what people think than he cares what God thinks. And he's become this sort of image manager, but his relationship with God, he just doesn't really care about it clearly, you know, because Samuel says, God's taking his blessing from you. And he says, okay, fine. Can we go out in the thing?
Yeah.
So not a good place to be. And so then the narrative shifts, and if you go over to 1 Samuel 16, you have the anointing of David, and something very strange happens when David is anointed. So what it says is that Samuel goes to Bethlehem, and he sort of concocts a bit of a ruse, a guise. Oh, I'm here to sacrifice with you guys. Bring in Jesse. And so then Samuel says, in peace, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So he's instructed these people to come. He told Jesse, you and your sons come with me to the sacrifice. And there he's going to anoint one of the sons of Jesse, right? And then it says this. Then he consecrated the sons of Jesse, invited them to sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab. Eliab is the oldest son of Jesse, David's oldest brother. And he said, certainly the Lord's anointed one is here before him. So Samuel, it's kind of funny. He should know better, right? They anointed Saul based on he was a big, good-looking, broad-shouldered, tall guy. He looked the part. That didn't work out so well. Then Eliab walks in, and he looks the part, and Samuel's like, oh, that's the one. It says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his stature. So he's another big, good-looking kid, because I have rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart. Okay? So what you have set up here is a tension between, again, what humans see and what humans like. And we know what humans like, right? Humans like good looking. I mean, we have whole fashion and entertainment industries that are utterly, completely centered around good looking humans. Mm-hmm. I won't name anyone, but you can think of certain celebrities or, singers, actors, whatever. And the reality is, this may not be the best actress in the world, but she's very good looking, so she gets the part. Or this person might be the best singer in the world, but they're very easy to look at, and so they get the part, right? We like that. We like talent. We like people that are amazingly gifted. We like intelligence. We also kind of worship that, right? Like we have these guys, the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks of the world that are sort of the super brain power guys. And we're like, wow, that's awesome. And we kind of get excited about that. We like money. We have certain things that we like. And God says, yeah, I don't really look at that. Look at the heart. And I have a different criteria. And David fits none of the criteria. Okay. He's clearly the youngest son, but I think there's more going on than that. This is not something you can't be proven from the text, but I think that you can say the text points us towards this. And I think that there's a good number of Bible scholars that would agree with this, which I think actually David, not only was David the youngest, I think he was actually illegitimate. I think he was most likely, Jesse had at some point had some sort of fling, and David was the byproduct of that, and that his mother was not, fully married to or a wife of Jesse. And I think that there are several context clues, if you would, throughout the Bible that point us that direction.
You think we'll unpack some more David content in the future?
Absolutely.
So we'll probably get into it.
Well, we'll do that now. And when we do and we may rehash some of that David content. I don't want to get into like the specifics of like what went down when he fought Goliath and things like that. But I would like to talk about like, why, quickly just sort of make the case, why do I think there's something off in this family? Why do I think maybe David is, like I said, illegitimate? Or there's more than just he's the youngest, clearly. Mm-hmm. And I think you see that in his not being invited. Bring your sons, and then you don't bring him. Well, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. When you flip over, that's in 1 Samuel 16. After the anointing, if you flip over to 1 Samuel 17, David just before he fights Goliath, has a confrontation with Eliab, with the oldest son. And Eliab, the quote is this. So David has sort of left Bethlehem and walked down to the battle site. And Eliab looks at him and says, "Why did you come down here? Why did you leave those few sheep, with you in the wilderness?" So it's like, first off, if David's a full son, why would, and Eliab's a part of the family, why would he be insulting David's flock? Why would David have why would it be, those few sheep with you? And why would that be stated that way? But then he says, "I know your arrogance and your evil heart." And in Hebrew, the I know there, it implies that I personally know something. The thought is that, like, Eliab saying, like, "I know your secret. I know the thing." And again, you have to remember that at this time in history, they really believed in sort of inherited sin, inherited cursing. Even in the New Testament, there's a moment where Jesus and the disciples pass a blind man, and the disciples say, "What did he or his parents do to deserve this?" And so the idea is that sin leads to a curse that comes out. So if you're blind, you're crippled, there's something wrong with you, well, somehow you deserved that. There's some sort of like God's karmic system or something that what led this to happen. And so the idea is, if you were born illegitimately, or that there's something wrong with you, there's something bad about you, and therefore your heart is evil, which is what Eliab says to him. So that's one. And then also, there's a very interesting thing in Psalms 51, which is the psalm that David writes after he sins with Bathsheba, and it's his psalm of repentance. But there's a sentence in there. It's 51:5. The translation I'm looking at says, "I was brought forth in guilt." Some will say, "I was born in sin, and in sin my mother conceived me." Now, some translations will soften that a bit and say, "I was sinful when I was born." But that's a funny, I don't really think that's what the Hebrew means, because the idea of, that we're born sinful, sort of the Augustinian, what's the word for the doctrine? Original sin concept. That's later. That there's no Old Testament concept like that. And also throughout the Old Testament, anytime someone is born or conceived, it's really always celebrated. It's almost always, and whatever, and he knew her, and they conceived and bore a son, and it's always like, yay, Abraham had a son, yay, Isaac had a son. And it's incredibly rare because in that culture, having descendants was like the thing.
Yeah.
And so conception and birth was really, really celebrated. You see that in all the stories in the Old Testament where women are barren, don't have children, in their desperation, like Hannah and people like that are like, "God, please, please help me have a child." So to talk about a birth or conception being evil or sinful is maybe even singular in the Old Testament. Like, I don't really know that you don't get a whole lot of conceptions and births being like talked about like that. And in sin my mother conceived me. So it again, for me, if I'm having to guess, and I can't prove this from the text, but I think the text it encourages it or indicates it maybe, I think it can be extrapolated from the text.
Yeah.
That I think David is probably illegitimate. He's certainly the youngest, probably illegitimate. And God picks him. He doesn't pick the oldest brother, who's the best looking one and the tall one and the broad shouldered one. God picks the young, ruddy one, it says, the redhead of the bunch or whatever.
Yeah.
And he picks him. And you see over the course really of 1 Samuel 16 and 17. So 1 Samuel 16 is the anointing. 1 Samuel 17 is the fight with Goliath. And I don't want to go into the fight with Goliath in detail, but what I will say is this: between Samuel 16 and 17, you see David disrespected by everybody. You know, the prophet, well, first off, his father doesn't invite him. You know, bring your sons. He doesn't count. Okay, that has to hurt. That's not nice. And then, and even if he is just the youngest somehow, but it still means that somehow in the family he is despised and not appreciated. It doesn't make any sense, really. Okay, so it's his father. Then his brother, when he goes down to the battlefield, you know, his brother's like, "Why are you here? You and your, you know, your heart and you're bad. Ugh, get out of here. You just came to watch the battle." So that's not very good. And then he says, the prophet. I mean, Samuel himself wanted to anoint the older brother because he's better looking, you know. So then he gets to, you know, where they're going to fight, and he says, "Hey, I think I can take out Goliath." And everybody's like, "Nah, you're a kid. You can't do it." They take him before the king, and the king's like, "Nah, there's no way. You're not able to do this." So by the time he gets to the battlefield with Goliath, he's been told, you can't, you're not good. You're not, you know, like completely, again, disrespected, I guess, by his religious authority, by his father, by his family, by his civil authority, by the king. And then to make matters worse, he steps out on the battlefield and Goliath laughs at him. Goliath's like, "Really? You? That you're the best they could do?" Like he says, you know, "Am I a dog? They brought a stick?" You know, like what is this? He's universally like, "Nah, no way. Can't be you." But God says, "No, I looked at his heart, and that's who I picked." And so, you know, if you know the story, he does go into that battle. He does fight Goliath and win. And we'll talk about that more in another episode. And he goes on to be, you know, the king that establishes the kingdom of Israel, and establishes the capital and all these things that really matter. And he shouldn't have been, you know, like he shouldn't have been the one. And again, so that gets back to, you know, what is application then? Well, application is, you know, you think you've got something in your past. I mean, obviously David had something in his past that Eliab is referencing there. "I know, you know, about you, you know, your wicked heart. You know, not the best looking one, not the biggest one, not the, you know, he's the one that dad sticks off in the corner. Like, just go watch the sheep while we do stuff, you know." And somehow David, through all of that, is faithful, and he keeps his heart after God, and he trusts the Lord. And God comes along and says, "Yeah, we're going to change this now. We're going to elevate this one," you know. And so I think there is a huge application there, which is, you know, first off, for us as, you know, for anyone who has any level of leadership, you know, if you're Samuel in the story, you know, really be careful how you evaluate people. You know, we're not supposed to look on people the same way the world looks on people, to say, "Oh yeah, you're smart, you're athletic, you're talented, you're beautiful, so that's who I'm gonna elevate." No, it's like character matters more, you know. And then it's also on us to, as just humans, to remember, like, yeah, you don't want to have a horrible image. It's not like you just want to be the ugliest, nastiest version of yourself possible. You want to present well. Of course you want those things, but reality matters more. And so, you know, as we sort of carry this idea forward of God using unlikely people. Well, so first he uses Ruth, a Moabitess, hated nation. Then he uses David, the youngest, likely illegitimate son, disliked by his family, not really respected by anyone, including his enemies, his king, his prophet, his dad. And God says, "No, I'll use that." And if God has chosen you, and if you're faithful to him, well, what those people think doesn't really matter at all. So I think that's sort of where this one lands, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love that. I mean, I think that's true. I think that's we see that many times, and even when Jesus is picking his guys, right? You see that
he picks
narrative.
A gnarly group of oddballs.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, the moral of the story is everyone gets included in the.
Yeah, well, so much so that one of the big criticisms of Jesus was like, "Ooh, he hangs out with those people."
Yeah.
You know, he goes to Zacchaeus' house and the whole town is complaining. Why did he go there? You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, he hangs out with prostitutes and sinners. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing, whatever Eliab is referencing in David's background, I know you, God says like, yeah, we can get beyond that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to use you because I've seen your heart.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, this is kind of, I mean, it is the narrative of the gospel. But yet it's like the church, capital C, we messed that up to people outside the church somehow, that they think it's the opposite.
They think we're a respectability club.
Oh, I have to be good to be in there. I have to be perfect in some way, or I have to live up to some expectation or whatever. Yeah, it's like there's a the cart gets before the horse or whatever. You know?
Yeah, sure.
Or it's like the process of sanctification, I guess, to use a spiritual word, starts to look like the billboard or whatever of what.
Yeah, well, we want to be, you know, we want to be what Jesus would later criticize in the Pharisees, where we want to become like superficially holy and respectable, so people will think well of us. And it's not about you pleasing God and what's going on internally. Now, if what's going on internally is right, then your externals probably should be improving and doing better, and you should look. You know, you probably shouldn't be out of control and doing horrific. You know, it's not that we don't care about how you act or how you look at a certain level. It's just where's your priority on that? You know, what's your focus? And again, when God's picking, He looks at the heart. You know, so I think that's the big takeaway from this one.
Cool, awesome. So Ruth, David. Anything else in Bethlehem? Anything important that we're going to do in the next series?
Yes, Jesus is going to get born.
Jesus, that's right.
We'll land this thing on Jesus.
That's always, isn't Jesus? Jesus is always the answer, right? He's always
In this case, it is, at least for this one.
Awesome. Well, hey, that was awesome. That's all for this episode, in part 2 of the Bethlehem stories. But we'll pick up next episode with the birth of Jesus and continue on. So as always, check us out on thelandandthebible.com for more content. See you next time.
Hey guys, if you like our content, please click like and subscribe. That really helps us out a lot. And then also go to thelandandthebible.com and subscribe for premium content. If you go over there, we've got tons of stuff that's really great. We have print materials that you can download. We have PDF study guides for all of our lessons. We've got devotional materials over there. We also have every single video and podcast we've done in full-length format with no ad interruptions and full video. So you can get all of that on thelandandthebible.com with the premium subscription, and that really helps us. It helps us generate more content, and also half of it goes to help us go overseas and help refugee kids, is what we're really called to do.